The autumn sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Murphy's Bar, a weathered establishment on the edge of Riverside, Montana. The small town had seen better days, its main street lined with more closed storefronts than open ones. But Murphy's remained, a fixture for nearly 40 years, where locals gathered to share stories over cold beer and greasy burgers. On this particular Saturday afternoon, the rumble of motorcycles shattered the usual quiet. One by one, a dozen Hell's Angels pulled into the lot, their leather cuts bearing the unmistakable winged skull patch. They were passing through on their way to a rally in Wyoming, and Murphy's was their chosen rest stop. Inside the dimly lit bar, 72-year-old Martha Hayes sat in her usual corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite her age, her posture remained military straight. The lines on her face told stories of both joy and sorrow, but her blue eyes still held a sharpness that most people half her age had lost. Martha had been coming to Murphy's every Saturday for the past 5 years, ever since her husband Thomas had passed. It was their tradition, started back when they were newlyweds. Even alone, she kept it alive, finding comfort in the familiar surroundings and the gentle chatter of neighbors. The bar's regulars barely looked up as the bikers filed in. This wasn't the first time the Hells Angels had stopped here, and Murphy, the barrel-chested owner behind the bar, knew how to handle them. Respect was a two-way street, and as long as they paid their tab and didn't cause trouble, everyone got along fine. The bikers took over the center of the bar, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. They were loud and rough around the edges, but not threatening. Most of them were in their 40s and 50s, veterans of the road with stories etched into every scar and wrinkle. Martha watched them with quiet interest as she sipped her coffee. She had never been one to judge people by appearance. Her years in the Army had taught her that courage and character came in all packages, and the toughest-looking people sometimes had the gentlest hearts. One biker in particular caught her attention. He was younger than the rest, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and a thick beard. What drew Martha's eye was the tattoo on his forearm, visible when he reached for his beer. It was an intricate design featuring an eagle clutching a rifle, with the words "Death Before Dishonor" curved above it. Below the eagle were the numbers 3712. Martha's hand trembled and she nearly dropped her coffee cup. Her breath caught in her throat as memories came flooding back with crushing force. She knew that tattoo. She knew those numbers. She had seen them countless times before, though it had been years since the last. The young biker noticed her staring and caught her eye. For a moment, their gazes locked, and something unspoken passed between them. Martha looked away quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. She shouldn't say anything. It was probably just a coincidence. Lots of military tattoos looked similar, and those numbers could mean anything. But even as she tried to convince herself, she knew better. The design was too specific, too unique. It was exactly the same. Martha's mind drifted back 32 years, to a small apartment in San Diego, where a determined 20-year-old girl with fire in her eyes had shown her mother a sketch of the tattoo she planned to get after basic training. "Mom, I know you don't like tattoos, but this means something to me," her daughter Sarah had said, her voice both defiant and pleading. "The eagle represents freedom, the rifle represents my service, and those numbers are the date I enlisted. March 7th, 2012. It's the day I became who I was meant to be." Martha had been against it at first. She came from a different generation, one where women didn't serve in combat roles and tattoos were for sailors and criminals. But Sarah had inherited her mother's stubborn streak, multiplied by 10. There was no talking her out of it. Sarah Hayes had joined the Army right out of high school, against her father's wishes and despite her mother's concerns. She wanted to be a soldier, a real one, not just a desk clerk or a nurse. She wanted to serve on the front lines, to prove that women could do anything men could do. And she had proven it over and over again. Sarah became a combat medic, one of the best in her unit. She served 2 tours in Afghanistan, saving lives under fire and earning the respect of every soldier who served alongside her. She was brave, dedicated, and absolutely fearless. The tattoo became her signature. Other soldiers in her unit recognized it, and some even got similar designs to honor their service together. It represented brotherhood, sacrifice, and an unbreakable bond formed in the crucible of war. But Sarah never came home from her second tour. A roadside bomb in Helmand province had taken her life along with 3 other soldiers on March 15, 2018. She was only 26 years old. The funeral had been the hardest day of Martha's life. Watching them fold the flag that draped her daughter's casket, hearing the rifle salute, seeing Sarah's young face on the memorial board surrounded by flowers, it had broken something inside Martha that had never quite healed. Thomas had been her rock through those dark months, but his own heart had been shattered too. He'd never been the same after losing their only child. Martha often wondered if grief had contributed to the heart attack that took him 5 years later. Now, sitting in Murphy's bar, staring at a stranger's forearm, all those memories came crashing back. Martha's hands shook as she set down her coffee cup. She tried to steady her breathing, tried to push the emotions back down where they'd been carefully stored for years. But she couldn't stop looking at that tattoo. The eagle's wings were positioned at exactly the same angle. The rifle was the same model Sarah had carried. Even the font of the words and numbers matched perfectly. It wasn't just similar, it was identical. The young biker was talking with his friends, laughing at some joke she couldn't hear. He seemed like a regular guy, despite the intimidating leather and patches. There was something familiar about his mannerisms, the way he tilted his head when he laughed, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners. Martha's rational mind told her to leave it alone. What good would it do to approach him? What could she possibly say? But her heart, the heart of a mother who had lost her daughter, needed to know. She needed to understand why this stranger wore her daughter's tattoo. She watched him for another 20 minutes, gathering her courage. The other bikers were getting louder as they ordered another round of beers. Murphy was keeping them well fed with baskets of wings and fries, and the jukebox was playing old rock songs that filled the spaces between conversations. Finally, Martha made her decision. Her hands were still trembling as she stood up from her booth, but her steps were steady as she walked toward the group of bikers. Several of them noticed her approach, and the conversation began to quiet down. The young man with the tattoo turned to face her, a polite but puzzled expression on his face. Up close, Martha could see that his eyes were green, much lighter than Sarah's dark brown, but there was a kindness in them that reminded her of her daughter. "Excuse me," Martha said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I noticed your tattoo." The young man glanced down at his forearm, then back at Martha with a slight smile. "Yes, ma'am, it's my service tattoo. I was Army." Martha nodded slowly. "I can see that. It's a beautiful design." She paused, gathering her courage for what she was about to say next. "My daughter had that same tattoo, exactly the same." The room didn't just get quiet, it froze. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every biker turned to look at Martha and then at their companion's arm. The young man's smile faded, replaced by a look of shock and something else Martha couldn't quite identify. Martha stood her ground, though her legs felt weak beneath her. Every eye in the bar was now focused on her and the young biker. Even Murphy had stopped wiping down glasses to watch the scene unfold. "My daughter," Martha repeated, her voice stronger now. She had that exact tattoo, the eagle, the rifle, the words, and those specific numbers. March 7th, 2012. That was the date she enlisted in the Army. The young man stared at her, his face going pale beneath his tan. He looked down at his tattoo as if seeing it for the first time, then back at Martha. His mouth opened, but no words came out. One of the older bikers, a grizzled man with gray in his beard and sergeant stripes tattooed on his neck, stepped forward. "Ma'am, are you sure? I mean, lots of military folks have eagle tattoos." "I'm certain," Martha said firmly. "My daughter designed that tattoo herself. She drew it out by hand before she had it inked. I watched her work on that design for weeks before her basic training ended. Those numbers 3, 7, 12, they were her enlistment date. And that rifle is a very specific model, the one she carried as a combat medic." The room remained frozen in silence. The young biker looked like he might be sick. He sank down onto a bar stool, still staring at his forearm as if it had betrayed him. "What was your daughter's name?" he asked quietly. Sarah Marie Hayes. She was a combat medic, served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the 101st Airborne Division. She died in Helmand Province on March 15, 2018. The young man's head snapped up. "Oh my God," he whispered. The color had completely drained from his face now. "Oh my God, Sarah Hayes." Several of the other bikers exchanged glances. The grizzled one who had spoken before put a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Tommy, you okay?" Tommy didn't answer. He was staring at Martha with an expression of horror, guilt, and something that might have been grief. His hands were shaking as he reached up to run them through his hair. "You knew her," Martha said. "It wasn't a question." Tommy's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Ma'am, maybe we should sit down. This isn't. I need to explain something to you." Martha felt her heart hammering in her chest, but she nodded. Tommy gestured to an empty table in the corner, away from the others. As they moved toward it, the grizzled biker followed them, and Murphy brought over 3 cups of coffee without being asked. They sat down, and for a long moment no one spoke. Tommy kept looking at his tattoo, then at Martha, then away, as if he couldn't bear to meet her eyes for more than a second. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I'm so sorry. I should have known better. I should have thought about this." "Thought about what?" Martha asked. "Please just tell me how you knew my daughter." Tommy took a deep breath and wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, as if drawing strength from its warmth. "My name is Tommy Reeves. I served with Sarah in Afghanistan. I was in her unit, part of the same combat team. She saved my life." Martha felt tears prickling at her eyes, but she held them back. "Tell me," she said simply. Tommy nodded, his own eyes growing wet. "It was during our second deployment. We were on patrol in a village near the Pakistan border. Sarah was our medic, the best I'd ever seen. She was tough, ma'am, tougher than most of the men. She never complained, never backed down, and she never left anyone behind." He paused, swallowing hard. "We got ambushed. IED went off, and then we took fire from 3 sides. It was chaos. I got hit in the leg and went down hard. I was bleeding bad, couldn't move, and I was completely exposed. The rest of the guys had to fall back to cover, but I was stuck in the middle of the street." The grizzled biker, who Tommy had called his friend, put a hand on his shoulder again. But Tommy continued, needing to get the story out. "Sarah came for me. She ran through gunfire, bullets were kicking up dirt all around her, and she dragged me to cover. Then she worked on me for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, stopping the bleeding, keeping me conscious, telling me I was going to be fine. She wouldn't let me give up." Martha listened, tears now streaming freely down her face. This was her Sarah, the girl who had been fierce and protective since childhood, who had once fought off 3 boys who were bullying a smaller kid at school. "Because of her I lived," Tommy said, his voice thick with emotion. "The medevac got there and they got me out. I spent 2 months recovering, but I survived. Sarah saved my life, Mrs. Hayes. She's the reason I'm sitting here today." "And the tattoo?" Martha asked softly. Tommy looked down at his arm again, and now Martha could see the shame in his expression. "After I recovered, after I got discharged and came home, I wanted to honor her. See, Sarah, she didn't make it home. It happened while I was still in the hospital in Germany. The guys told me later. She was killed by a roadside bomb while trying to reach wounded soldiers. Martha nodded, unable to speak. She knew this story, had heard it from the army chaplain who came to inform them of Sarah's death. But hearing it from someone who had served alongside her daughter made it both more painful and somehow more real. I wanted to remember her, Tommy continued. Wanted to carry a piece of her with me always, so I got her tattoo. I found a picture of it. One of the guys in our unit had a photo from when we were all hanging out in camp one day. I took it to a tattoo artist and had him copy it exactly. He looked up at Martha, his eyes pleading for understanding. I didn't think about her family. I didn't think about how it might look or what it might mean to someone who loved her. I wanted to honor her memory. She was my hero, ma'am. She was all of our hero. The grizzled biker spoke up then. I'm Jake Morrison, ma'am. I was Tommy's squad leader in Afghanistan. Everything he's saying is true. Your daughter was one of the finest soldiers I ever had the privilege to serve with. She was brave, skilled, and she cared about every single person in that unit. When she died, it broke all of us. Martha wiped her eyes with a napkin Murphy had silently provided. I didn't know, she said quietly. The army told us about the bomb, about the other soldiers who died with her, but they didn't tell us much about her service, about the lives she saved or the person she was over there. They gave us her medals at the funeral, but medals don't tell you stories. She was incredible, Tommy said earnestly. She could patch up anything, gunshot wounds, shrapnel, broken bones. And she did it under fire, ma'am. She never hesitated. If someone was hurt, Sarah went to them, no matter how dangerous it was. That sounds like my Sarah, Martha said, a small smile breaking through her tears. Even as a little girl, she was always taking care of others. Found injured birds, stray dogs, any creature that needed help. Drove her father crazy, bringing home every wounded thing she could find. She talked about you sometimes, Tommy said. Around the campfire at night when we'd share stories about home. She said her mom was the strongest person she knew, that you'd raised her to stand up for what's right, to never back down from a fight, and to always help those who couldn't help themselves. Martha felt her heart clench. She said that. Yes, ma'am. She was proud of you. Said you'd served too back in the day and that you taught her what it meant to wear the uniform with honor. It was true. Martha had served in the army herself, back in the 80s, though in a much different capacity than Sarah. Women weren't allowed in combat roles then, so she'd worked in communications. But she tried to instill in Sarah the same values she'd learned: duty, honor, service. There's something else you should know, Jake said, leaning forward. Sarah didn't just save Tommy. She saved at least a dozen soldiers over her 2 deployments, maybe more. She was awarded the Bronze Star with V device for valor, and she was recommended for the Silver Star before she died. Martha knew about the Bronze Star. It had been presented to her and Thomas at the funeral. But she hadn't known about the Silver Star recommendation or about the dozen lives saved. Why didn't anyone tell us this? She asked, feeling a mixture of pride and frustration. Why didn't the army tell her father and me what she'd done? Jake shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, with all due respect, the army isn't always good at that kind of thing. They focus on the official reports, the medals and citations. But the real stories, the human stories, those usually only get shared between the soldiers who were there. Tommy nodded. Your daughter was a legend in our unit, Mrs. Hayes. After she died, some of the guys started a tradition. Anyone who served with Sarah and wanted to honor her could get her tattoo. Not everyone did. Some people honored her in different ways, but several of us carry this mark. It's our way of saying we remember and will never forget what she did for us. Martha sat back in her chair, trying to process everything she just heard. Her daughter, her Sarah, had been a legend. Other soldiers wore her tattoo as a badge of honor. The magnitude of Sarah's impact was so much larger than Martha had ever known. How many? She asked quietly. How many soldiers carry her tattoo? Tommy and Jake exchanged glances. I'm not sure exactly, Tommy admitted. I know of at least 6 from our unit, but Sarah served with different teams over 2 deployments. Could be more. Definitely more, Jake confirmed. I've run into guys at veteran gatherings who served with her on her first tour. They talk about her too. Sarah Hayes was the kind of soldier who left an impression. Martha felt overwhelming emotions washing over her: pride, grief, love, and a strange sense of discovery, as if she was meeting a new side of her daughter for the first time. She'd known Sarah was brave. She'd known her daughter was dedicated to service. But she hadn't fully understood the depth of Sarah's impact on the lives she'd touched. I wish I'd known, Martha said, her voice breaking. Her father and we were so proud of her, but we didn't know about most of this. She didn't talk much about her deployments when she came home on leave. She'd tell us she was fine, that the work was important, but she never bragged, never told us about the lives she'd saved. That was Sarah, Tommy said with a sad smile. She never wanted credit. She'd brush off compliments, change the subject when people tried to thank her. She'd say she was just doing her job, that any of us would have done the same thing. But you wouldn't have, Martha said, understanding something fundamental about her daughter that she'd somehow missed while Sarah was alive. Not everyone runs into gunfire to save others. Not everyone puts their life on the line like that. No, ma'am, they don't, Jake agreed. That's what made Sarah special. They talked for another hour, Tommy and Jake sharing stories about Sarah that Martha had never heard. They told her about the time Sarah had organized a medical clinic for local Afghan children, using her own supplies and time to treat kids who had no other access to health care. They told her about Sarah's sense of humor, how she could make the whole unit laugh even in the worst circumstances. They told her about her skill at cards, her terrible singing voice, her habit of writing letters to soldiers' families back home when the soldiers themselves couldn't find the words. With every story, Martha felt pieces of her daughter coming back to life. The grief was still there, it would always be there, but it was joined now by a fuller, richer understanding of who Sarah had been and what her life had meant. Other bikers gradually joined the conversation, pulling up chairs and adding their own perspectives. Several of them were veterans too, though none had served with Sarah directly. They listened with respect, offering condolences and sharing their own experiences of loss and remembrance. Murphy kept the coffee coming and eventually brought over sandwiches, sensing that this conversation would continue for a while. The regular bar patrons gave them space, but Martha noticed several of them wiping their eyes as bits of the story reached their ears. As the afternoon wore into evening, Martha made a decision. She looked at Tommy, then at his tattoo, and then back at his face. "I'm glad you got that tattoo," she said firmly. "I was angry at first when I saw it. Angry and hurt because I thought someone had stolen something that belonged to my daughter, but I understand now. You didn't steal it, she gave it to you. By saving your life, by being the person she was, she gave you the right to carry her memory." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Hayes, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Martha replied. "Just promise me you'll keep telling her story. Promise me that when people ask about that tattoo, you'll tell them about Sarah. Not just that she was a soldier, but who she was as a person. The girl who loved helping others, who never backed down, who gave everything she had to protect her brothers and sisters in arms." "I promise," Tommy said solemnly. "I've already been doing that, ma'am. Every time someone asks, I tell them about Sarah Hayes, the bravest medic I ever knew." Jake nodded. "We all do. It's part of the brotherhood. We take care of our own even after they're gone, especially after they're gone." Martha felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the tight knot of grief that had lived in her chest for years. The pain wasn't gone, it would never be gone, but it felt different now. Less isolating. Less like a burden she had to carry alone. "Tell me something," she said to Tommy. "What made you join the Hells Angels? It seems like a big change from the military." Tommy smiled, a genuine smile this time. It's not as different as you might think, ma'am. The brotherhood, the loyalty, the code of honor, it's all still there. After I left the army, I struggled. PTSD nightmares, couldn't hold down a regular job. The structure of military life was gone, and I didn't know how to function without it. Jake picked up the story. I found him about 3 years ago, working construction and living in a ratty apartment, pretty much just existing. I'd gotten out a year before him and had joined up with the MC. I brought him to a meeting, introduced him around, and he found what he'd been missing. Family, Tommy said simply. The MC became my new family. We look out for each other, support each other through the hard times. A lot of us are veterans. We understand what each other has been through. Martha nodded slowly. She'd had her own prejudices about motorcycle clubs, influenced by media portrayals and scary news stories. But looking at these men now, seeing the respect they showed her and hearing their stories, she realized they were just people looking for connection and purpose, much like anyone else. Sarah would have liked that, she said thoughtfully. She always believed in taking care of your team. She'd be happy to know you found a new team to belong to. The conversation eventually shifted to lighter topics. The bikers told funny road trip stories, and Martha shared memories of Sarah's childhood. The time she'd tried to give their cat a bath and ended up soaked herself. The way she'd insisted on wearing her Halloween costume to school for a week straight. Her determination to learn guitar despite having no musical talent whatsoever. As darkness fell outside, Martha realized she'd been in Murphy's for over 5 hours. It was the longest she'd stayed since Thomas died, and certainly the most emotionally intense afternoon she'd had in years. I should go, she said, starting to gather her purse. It's getting late, and I'm sure you gentlemen have places to be. Actually, ma'am, Jake said, we were planning to stay in town overnight. The rally doesn't start until tomorrow, and we like to take our time on the road. Would you be willing to meet us for breakfast tomorrow before we leave? There are a few more guys in our club who served with Sarah, and I know they'd want to meet you. Martha hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that very much. They exchanged phone numbers, and Jake promised to text her the details. As Martha stood to leave, Tommy stood as well. Mrs. Hayes, he said quietly, thank you for understanding and for not being angry about the tattoo. It means the world to me. Martha surprised herself by stepping forward and hugging him. Tommy stiffened in shock for a moment, then carefully hugged her back. When they separated, both had tears on their cheeks. Thank you for saving her memory, Martha said. Thank you for keeping her alive in your stories and in your heart. She shook hands with Jake and several of the other bikers, receiving kind words and respectful nods from each. As she walked out of Murphy's into the cool autumn night, she felt lighter than she had in years. The drive home was quiet, but Martha's mind was anything but. She thought about Sarah, about the daughter she'd raised and the soldier she'd become. She thought about Tommy and Jake and the other soldiers who carried Sarah's memory. She thought about the tattoo, no longer a painful reminder of loss but a symbol of honor and remembrance. When she pulled into her driveway, Martha sat in the car for a moment, looking up at the stars. I hope you can see this, baby girl, she whispered. I hope you know how much you mattered, how many lives you touched. Your daddy and I, we were always proud of you, but now I understand just how special you really were. Inside her house, Martha went to the spare bedroom that had once been Sarah's. She kept it mostly the same, with Sarah's high school trophies still on the shelf and her army dress uniform hanging in the closet. On the dresser was a framed photograph from Sarah's basic training graduation, her daughter looking proud and strong in her uniform. Martha picked up the photo and studied it closely. She could see in Sarah's eyes that same determination, that same fire that Tommy and Jake had described. It had always been there. Martha had just never fully understood where it would lead. She set the photo down and opened the top drawer of the dresser, pulling out a small wooden box. Inside were Sarah's medals, including the Bronze Star. Martha had looked at them countless times over the years, but tonight she saw them differently. These weren't just pieces of metal and ribbon. They represented lives saved, sacrifices made, a legacy of service that continued even after Sarah was gone. They represented the daughter Martha had raised and the hero she had become. Martha closed the box carefully and returned it to the drawer. Tomorrow she would meet more of Sarah's brothers and sisters in arms. Tomorrow she would hear more stories and learn more about the daughter she thought she'd known completely. But tonight she would sleep better than she had in years, knowing that Sarah's memory lived on in the hearts of those she'd saved, in the stories they told, and in the tattoos they wore with pride. Martha woke early the next morning, earlier than usual for a Sunday. She'd slept deeply, dreamlessly, for the first time in months. The house was quiet as she made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Morning, Mrs. Hayes. We're meeting at the Riverside Diner on Main Street at 9 a.m. Looking forward to seeing you again." Martha replied with a simple "I'll be there," then spent the next hour getting ready. She found herself taking more care with her appearance than usual, choosing a blue blouse that Sarah had once said brought out her eyes, and the silver necklace Thomas had given her on their 40th anniversary. As she drove into town, Martha noticed things she usually overlooked: the mountains in the distance, the way the morning light caught the river, the few stores that were still thriving on Main Street despite the economic troubles. Riverside might have been struggling, but it was still beautiful, still home. The Riverside Diner was busier than Martha expected for a Sunday morning. Several of the motorcycles were already parked outside, and she could see through the window that the bikers had pushed several tables together to create one long seating area. When Martha walked in, Tommy spotted her immediately and waved her over. The entire group stood as she approached, a sign of respect that caught her off guard. There were more of them than yesterday. She counted at least 15 bikers, plus Jake and Tommy. "Mrs. Hayes, thank you for coming," Jake said, pulling out a chair for her. "Let me introduce you to some people." Over the next few minutes, Martha met a parade of veterans. There was Marcus, a soft-spoken man with kind eyes who'd served as a rifleman in Sarah's unit. There was Danny, who'd been a driver and told Martha that Sarah had treated his shrapnel wounds after an ambush. There was Carlos, who'd been recommended for a medal by Sarah herself after he pulled 3 wounded soldiers to safety under fire. Each man shared a brief story about Sarah, and Martha listened with rapt attention. She was building a fuller picture of her daughter's service, piece by piece, story by story. But it was the last introduction that truly shocked her. "Mrs. Hayes," Jake said, "there's someone else here who wanted to meet you." He gestured toward a woman who'd been sitting quietly at the end of the table. "This is Rachel Morrison. She's my daughter, and she served with Sarah too." Rachel stood up, and Martha saw that she was in her late 20s, with short dark hair and an athletic build. She wore a leather jacket like the others, and when she extended her hand to shake Martha's, her sleeve rode up to reveal a familiar tattoo on her forearm. Sarah's eagle, rifle, and date. "Ma'am, it's an honor to meet you," Rachel said, her voice strong but emotional. "Your daughter saved my life." Martha felt her knees go weak, and Tommy quickly helped her into the chair. Rachel sat down across from her, and Jake put a supportive hand on his daughter's shoulder. "I didn't know there were women who served with Sarah in combat roles," Martha said quietly. I mean, the Army said she was one of only a few female combat medics." "She was one of the first," Rachel explained. "When I enlisted in 2014, there still weren't many of us. I wanted to be infantry, but they wouldn't let me, not yet, so I became a combat engineer instead. Sarah and I served together during her second deployment." Rachel's hands were shaking slightly as she continued. "We were clearing a route of IEDs when we got ambushed. I was hit twice, once in the shoulder and once in the side. I was bleeding out and the guys couldn't get to me because of the fire, But Sarah, she paused, swallowing hard. Sarah crawled through that fire, 50 meters on her belly, with bullets hitting all around her. She reached me and packed my wounds right there in the middle of the fight. Martha reached across the table and took Rachel's hand. The young woman's eyes were wet with tears. She kept talking to me the whole time, Rachel continued, telling me I was going to make it, that I was tough, that women like us didn't quit. She said she didn't crawl 50 meters through hell just to watch me give up. So I didn't give up. I held on until the medevac arrived, and Sarah stayed with me the whole time. That's my Sarah, Martha whispered. After I recovered and finished my service, I wanted to honor her, Rachel said. My dad told me about the guys getting her tattoo, and I wanted to do the same. Some people thought it was weird for a woman to join a motorcycle club, but these guys welcomed me. They understood what Sarah meant to all of us. Jake squeezed his daughter's shoulder. Rachel reminds me of Sarah sometimes. Tough, fearless, doesn't take crap from anyone. Sarah would have been proud to see the woman Rachel's become. The waitress came by to take orders, giving everyone a moment to compose themselves. When she left, the conversation shifted to lighter memories. The veterans shared stories about camp life, practical jokes they'd played on each other, and the small moments of humanity that got them through the hard times. Marcus told about the time Sarah had organized a secret birthday party for their lieutenant using MREs and a candle made from a crayon. Danny described how Sarah had learned to swear in Pashto just so she could yell at local merchants who tried to overcharge the soldiers. Carlos shared that Sarah had kept a photo of Martha and Thomas in her helmet and would sometimes talk to it before dangerous missions. She'd say, "Okay, Mom and Dad, wish me luck," Carlos said with a gentle smile. Then she'd put her helmet on and go do whatever insane thing needed to be done. Martha laughed through her tears. She did that as a child too. Before soccer games or big tests, she'd talk to her teddy bear for good luck. I had no idea she kept doing it. The food arrived, and they ate together, the conversation flowing naturally between war stories and civilian life. Martha learned that Marcus ran a construction company now, that Danny worked as a trucker, that Carlos taught high school history. Each had found their own way forward after the military, but they all maintained connection through the motorcycle club and their shared memories. "Mrs. Hayes," Tommy said after they'd finished eating, "there's something we'd like to give you if you'll accept it." Jake pulled a package from his bag and slid it across the table. It was wrapped in simple brown paper, about the size of a book. Martha opened it carefully and found herself looking at a leather-bound photo album. With trembling hands, she opened it. The first page held a photograph she'd never seen before: Sarah in full combat gear, sitting on a sandbag with other soldiers from her unit. She was smiling broadly, her arm around Tommy on one side and Rachel on the other. She looked happy, confident, and completely in her element. "We put this together for you," Jake explained. "Everyone who served with Sarah contributed photos and wrote down their memories. It's not everything, we didn't have time to reach everyone, but it's a start." Martha slowly turned the pages. There were dozens of photos of Sarah she'd never seen. Sarah treating a wounded soldier. Sarah playing cards with her unit. Sarah helping Afghan children. Sarah in a rare moment of rest, sleeping against her pack. Each photo was accompanied by handwritten notes from the soldiers who'd served with her, telling their stories and sharing their memories. "This is incredible," Martha whispered. I don't have words." "Your daughter gave us so much," Rachel said. "This is just a small way of giving something back to you." Martha continued through the album, reading every word, studying every photo. Near the end, she found a section titled Sarah's Legacy. It contained photographs of all the soldiers who had gotten Sarah's tattoo, including some she hadn't met yet. 15 faces in total, each one wearing the same eagle, rifle, and date. 15 lives saved, 15 people who carried Sarah's memory on their skin. On the last page was a letter, written in Jake's neat handwriting. Dear Mrs. Hayes, your daughter was a hero in the truest sense of the word. She didn't seek glory or recognition. She simply saw people who needed help and refused to let anything stop her from providing it. She taught us what real courage looks like, what real sacrifice means. Every person in this book owes their life to Sarah. Some of us literally. She pulled us from the fire and kept us breathing. Others of us in less obvious ways. She gave us hope when we had none, strength when we felt weak, and an example of what a true soldier should be. She is gone, but she is not forgotten. As long as we live, as long as we share her story, Sarah Hayes will continue to save lives by inspiring others to be brave, to be kind, and to never give up on their fellow human beings. Thank you for raising such an extraordinary person. The world is better because Sarah was in it, even if only for 26 years. With deepest respect and gratitude, the brothers and sisters of Sarah Hayes. Martha closed the album and held it to her chest, unable to speak through her tears. Around the table, several of the veterans were crying too, even the ones who usually maintained stoic expressions. Rachel came around the table and hugged Martha, then Tommy, then Jake. One by one, each veteran embraced her, and Martha felt surrounded by the family Sarah had built, the brothers and sisters she'd fought alongside and died protecting. When everyone had returned to their seats, Martha finally found her voice. I need to tell you all something, she said. For years I've been angry, angry at the army for taking my daughter, angry at the war, angry at the roadside bomb that killed her. I've been so focused on what I lost that I couldn't see what Sarah gave. She looked around the table at each face. But meeting all of you, hearing your stories, seeing these photographs, I understand now. Sarah didn't die for nothing. She lived for something. She lived to help others, to protect her team, to make a difference. And she did make a difference. She made all the difference in the world. Mrs. Hayes, Marcus said quietly, there's something else you should know. We're not the only ones who remember Sarah. There's a medical clinic in Afghanistan, in the village where she used to treat local kids. The villagers named it after her. The Sarah Hayes Clinic. It's still operating, still helping people. Martha's hand flew to her mouth. I didn't know. Nobody told me. The army doesn't always track those things, Jake explained. But we've stayed in touch with some of the interpreters we worked with. They send us updates sometimes. The clinic has treated thousands of people over the years. Sarah's legacy lives on there too. The conversation continued for another hour, stories flowing like water. Martha learned things about her daughter that made her laugh and cry and feel proud all over again. She learned that Sarah had been learning to speak Pashto, that she'd planned to go to medical school after her service, that she'd written letters to the families of fallen soldiers to make sure they knew their loved ones had been heroes. When it was finally time for the bikers to leave, they gathered outside the diner for a final farewell. The morning had turned into afternoon, and the autumn sun was warm on their faces. Mrs. Hayes, Jake said, we ride through this area a few times a year. Would it be okay if we stopped to visit you sometimes? Maybe share a meal and swap more stories about Sarah? I would love that, Martha said sincerely. Please, all of you, consider my home your home. You're Sarah's family, which makes you my family too. Rachel hugged her tightly. Thank you for raising her right, for making her the person she was. Everything good she did came from what you taught her. As the motorcycles roared to life and began pulling out of the parking lot, each rider gave Martha a final wave or nod. She stood on the sidewalk, watching them go, the photo album clutched in her arms. Tommy was the last to leave. He stopped his bike next to Martha and pulled off his helmet. Mrs. Hayes, I just want you to know I'm going to keep my promise. Every time someone asks about this tattoo, I'm going to tell them about Sarah Hayes. I'm going to tell them about the bravest, kindest, most dedicated soldier I ever knew. Your daughter saved my life, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure people know what an amazing person she was. Thank you, Tommy, Martha said, and please call me Martha. He smiled, replaced his helmet, and rode off to catch up with the others. Martha watched until the last motorcycle disappeared from sight, the rumble of engines fading into the distance. She walked back to her car slowly, taking her time, in no hurry to leave this moment behind. As she drove home, Martha thought about the past 24 hours and how completely they had changed her understanding of Sarah's life and death. That evening, Martha sat in Sarah's old room with the photo album open on her lap. She studied each photo again, reading each story, committing every detail to memory. Her phone rang, and she was surprised to see it was her sister, calling from Arizona. "Martha, I've been thinking about you," her sister said. "I know this time of year is always hard. How are you doing?" Martha looked at the photo album, at Sarah's smiling face surrounded by her military family. "Actually," she said, "I'm doing okay. Better than okay. I have something wonderful to tell you about Sarah." And she did. She told her sister everything, about the tattoo and Tommy and the album and all 15 soldiers who carried Sarah's memory. She talked for over an hour, and when she finally hung up, she felt energized rather than drained. Over the next few weeks, Martha's life began to change in small but significant ways. She started volunteering at the local Veterans Center, helping coordinate support services for soldiers returning from deployment. She reached out to the families of the other soldiers who had died alongside Sarah, sharing what she'd learned and connecting them with the survivors. Tommy and Rachel and several of the others stayed in touch, calling occasionally to check in or share a new memory they'd remembered. Jake sent her updates about the Sarah Hayes Clinic in Afghanistan, including photos of the building and some of the children being treated there. Martha had the photo of Sarah with her unit enlarged and framed, hanging it in her living room where she could see it every day. She started going through Sarah's belongings more carefully, finding letters and journals she hadn't been able to read before. Each discovery was bittersweet but no longer unbearable. 3 months later, on what would have been Sarah's 34th birthday, Martha organized a memorial gathering at Murphy's Bar. She invited the local veterans groups, some of Sarah's high school friends, and of course, the bikers who had become her extended family. 15 motorcycles pulled into the parking lot that day, and 15 people with identical tattoos walked into Murphy's to celebrate the life of Sarah Hayes. They shared stories, raised toasts, and laughed and cried together. Murphy donated the food, and the local newspaper sent a reporter who wrote a front-page story about the female combat medic from Riverside who had saved so many lives. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Martha stood with Tommy and Rachel near the bar. "Thank you," she said to them both. "Thank you for bringing my daughter back to me, not physically but in all the ways that matter. I know her now, really know her in a way I never did before." "She brought us to you," Rachel said. "That's what Sarah did. She brought people together, created connections, built family out of strangers. We're just following her example." That night, alone in her house, Martha sat down and wrote a letter to Sarah. She'd tried many times over the years but had never been able to find the right words. Now they flowed easily. "Dear Sarah, I finally understand what you were doing over there. You weren't just following orders or doing a job. You were living your values, being the person I raised you to be, taking care of those who needed help. You were being you, just on a bigger stage with higher stakes. I'm so proud of you, baby girl. Prouder than I ever knew how to express when you were alive. You saved 15 lives that I know of, probably more. You started a clinic that's still helping people. You inspired soldiers to be brave and kind. You created a family bound by loyalty and love. I miss you every single day. I always will, but I'm not just grieving anymore. I'm celebrating you, honoring you, and making sure your story gets told. Because your story matters. Your life mattered. And the legacy you left behind will continue to matter for generations to come. 15 people carry your tattoo. 15 people carry your memory in their hearts. And now I carry it too, not as a burden of loss but as a treasure of love. Thank you for being my daughter. Thank you for being a hero. Thank you for showing all of us what true courage looks like. I love you forever. Mom. Martha sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it in the photo album, a permanent record of how a chance encounter in a small-town bar had transformed her grief into something beautiful. Outside, the Montana night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant against the dark sky. Martha looked up, searching for patterns in the constellations, and imagined Sarah looking down, proud of her mother for finally understanding, for finally seeing the full picture of who she'd been and what she'd accomplished. Somewhere on a highway heading west, 15 motorcycles carried 15 pieces of Sarah Hayes' story toward new destinations. And in small-town diners and veteran halls and living rooms across the country, people who had served with Sarah would continue to tell her story, to honor her memory, and to live by the example she'd set. The room had frozen when Martha first spoke those words. My daughter has that same tattoo. But from that moment of frozen shock had come warmth, connection, understanding, and a family reunited across the bridge between the living and the dead. Sarah Hayes might be gone, but she would never be forgotten. Her legacy lived on in the lives she'd saved, the stories that were told, and the tattoos that marked 15 souls as forever changed by her bravery and compassion. And her mother, Martha Hayes, would make sure that for as long as she lived, everyone knew about the combat medic from Riverside, Montana, who gave everything to protect others and in doing so, became immortal.